Hello, and welcome to the course of U.S. History. I'm your host, Mr. Samuelson. Last time we were together, we looked at the colonial culture of New England and what drove that culture and the economy of the New England colonies. This is part 2 in our look at colonial cultural zones. Today we're looking at the culture of the Middle Colonies, which you'll notice is quite a bit different than that of New England. First of all, whereas New England soil was poor, the Middle Colonies had really great soil for food crops. In particular, wheat, but also oats and barley and rye grew pretty well within these Middle Colonies. And they pretty quickly got the name the Breadbasket Colonies because they were producing so much of these great food crops. Now, the colonies made a lot of money doing this. They exported a lot of grain and a lot of meat. They were able to raise so much that this wasn't subsistence farming. It wasn't just enough to feed yourself and your family. They were producing well over what they needed to produce for themselves and their own family, and therefore they could sell these extra goods, usually back to England. Now, to help with this production and transportation, we have the invention of the Conestoga wagon, a very large wagon that could hold up to 2 tons of farm produce. It helped move it from the farms to these wide, deep rivers where they could get on boats and head out across the Atlantic Ocean. Now, these farm products were largely gathered together and shipped from cities, port cities like New York and Philadelphia, which are growing to be very important cities in the colonial time. Just like with Boston, New York and Philly also gathered together a lot of artisans. These are those skilled craftsmen that help to provide services to those who are living and trading within New York and Philadelphia. You might have rope makers and glass blowers, coopers who make barrels, or silversmiths, ironsmiths, a lot of people who are going to come together to produce the goods and services that are needed to help our merchants and help our dock workers lead the lives that they want to lead. Now, New York and Philadelphia were so successful and so important in this that by the mid-1700s, by the time of the American Revolution, these two cities are actually larger than Boston. So Boston had had that head start. The city started long before New York and Philadelphia were first settled, but New York and Philadelphia, because of this important agricultural trade, become larger and in many ways more significant cities than Boston, although Boston will definitely have the major role in the American Revolution, or at least getting it started. Now, we talked in New England about religion and to some degree religious intolerance. However, the Middle Colonies are going to have to, by necessity, have a greater degree of tolerance because this was not settled by Anglican or Puritan Englishmen. It was first settled by the Dutch and the Swedes. We had had New Sweden, we'd had New Netherlands that pre-existed any English settlement in the region. Now, this large non-English population, notably the Germans, start coming over in large numbers because Germany is just simply not a place that you want to be at this time period. It was very unstable. Leads to a lot of growth of non-English settlers. And as these non-English settlers come in, they bring in their religions, which are not necessarily the English religions. They're not necessarily Puritan or Anglican. They're bringing all these other Protestant faiths from Northern Europe. Probably most notably, Lutherans come over in large numbers. Now, the daily life in the Middle Colonies revolved around the farm. We had those important port cities, New York and Philadelphia, but most New England colonists lived on the farms, growing the food and raising the animals needed to make these colonies economically successful. But as you had a lot of settlers from a lot of different regions, they learned from each other. They would take the best farming practices from Germany and mix those with the best farming practices from the Netherlands and from England. And they worked together to create a very effective, efficient farming system within these colonies. One of the best known practices at the time, something that really was helpful, was the German practice of a barn raising. The idea that the construction of a barn is this tremendously difficult task for any individual family to do. But if you have an entire community that comes together in some sort of a party atmosphere, and they work over a shorter period of time to create a barn for one family, then that has tremendous benefits to the community as a whole, because when your barn falls down, or if you need to raise a new barn, the community will come together and will support you as well. So again, it's the community coming together, helping everybody to be successful individually so that you can be successful as a whole. Now, education in the Middle Colonies is, again, this one is very different from New England. New England had that Massachusetts school law. You had to have schools. Everybody was taught to read. Not true in the Middle Colonies. The Middle Colonies did not have public schools. There were a couple of private schools. Certainly some wealthier people hired tutors to help teach their kids. But mostly, children who wanted to do something other than farming had to learn these skills as an apprentice. That is, as an assistant who was learning how to do this trade. And typically you would have some sort of arrangement where your father would make an arrangement with somebody who had a skill, a marketable skill, and your father would give them a sum of money, and then you would go live with that master for a set period of time. And that set period of time was determined by the skills needed to really master that particular field. Typically 5-7 years might be a general apprenticeship. Now, apprentice worked for that skills tradesman. They would do so until they had enough skill to themselves become a master. Or there was an intermediate stage called a journeyman. A journeyman would be somebody who had graduated from an apprenticeship but hadn't really set up their own shop yet. So you might go work for a master for a wage. But your goal within these apprenticeships was to one day become a master, have your own shop, run your own smithy, bake your own bread, really be a master of this particular craft and able to then take on apprentices of your own. So that was education within the Middle Colonies. Next time we're going to be looking at the culture of the Southern Colonies. And here we're going to not just look at the plantation system of Southern farming, but also take a moment to look at slavery, which we'll certainly circle back to a few times within this series. Thank you for joining me today for the course of U.S. history, and farewell.